Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. We've come down to verse 22 for the where Paul is beginning his sermon on Mars Hill to the Areopagus. We've talked about these people that he's with there. He's waiting for his companions at Athens. While he's waiting, he's not losing any time. He's going out into the marketplaces. He's going out into the squares. He's in the city that's full of idols. He's reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and devout people, and in the marketplace every day with those who happen to be there. We talked about the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers as they converse with him, and how important it is to know who these groups are and what they stand for as we start to go into Paul's lesson, or his sermon here, his speech to them. Now, really quickly, the Epicureans, you can party it up. You can live whatever life you want to live. You can be whatever you want to be. There's nothing you can do that's going to mar the Spirit. The Spirit's going to be fine. Make your sacrifices, make to your gods, and that's all you need to do. As long as you check those boxes, everything else is fine. The Stoics, on the other hand, are the exact opposite. In fact, taking it to such a degree that they will starve themselves, they will beat themselves. In Colossians chapter 2, you see a little bit about this in talking about beating themselves with chains. And taste not, touch not, handle not. Those things that are the Stoic belief that you've got to punish this physical body in order to punish the sin within the spirit. So one side believes the spirit and the flesh are not connected. The other side goes too far the other direction, that the spirit and the flesh are connected. That they're connected in such a way that you can affect the spiritual side by beating or starving or neglecting the physical side. So Paul's going to, some of these things we get into his sermon here, those are going to come out, especially down towards the end, and that's what's going to cause the uproar towards the end that, well, you know, we're not going to listen to, we need to hear you some other time. We're going to close this out now. So while he's there in the midst of the Areopagus, and a very interesting opening statement, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. In every way you are very religious. Some translations are going to say there that you are very superstitious. I think that's the King James Version there, and I believe it's the American Standard Version as well, that you are very superstitious. What it means is that you're devout. You're devout. In everything that you do, you are devout. You are devoted to this. This is not calling them religious in some way. This is not condoning the things that they. All Paul is saying is that what I'm seeing out of you is that you're a devoted people. When you find something that you believe in, you devote yourself wholeheartedly to it. You give 110% to these things. That's all that Paul is saying here with this word here. I perceive that you're a very devout, you're a very devoted people. And we looked at this last week. I believe Brother Bobby talked about being zealous, how zealous the Jews were for that, how Paul was zealous for this is another thing that we could use to describe this word right here, is that they were a zealous people. They were so devoted to whatever they found that they were zealous in that. Brother Bobby?
You know, that's kind of interesting that you say that. That just shows you can be zealous over something but not have the knowledge. And truly, they were like the Jews, but they were on the other end of the spectrum because they were looking at it from a true false God standpoint. Okay? And there's some interesting statements that they make, and kind of makes you wonder if you're not seeing some of the same thought pattern today when the gospel is preached. One of the things that they say here, and I'm going to back up a little bit, verse 18, it says that he is a seemeth to be a setter forth of strange gods, because he preached unto them Jesus and the resurrection. Now, I want you to think about that statement. That is strange unto them. To hear that about one being resurrected from the dead for the salvation of your sins. Is that not another way of saying today that the doctrine that the Apostle Paul is preaching is distinct? The gospel is like no other message that's ever been spoke or written. When the gospel is spoke, it's so distinct, it's easy to separate it from other doctrines because it's so different. And it did seem strange unto them because, like Reed said, they were a devoted people, a religious people, if you will. So what they did was, every time they heard about a new God, if you will, they want to set up an altar to it. So maybe somewhere down the line, Daniel, we accepted all of you. Maybe somewhere down the line we'll get something out of it when we pass away or whatever, right? So we collectively got all these together and we want to make sure we don't leave nobody out to the unknown God. And of course, this is the God that is going to be declared unto them because truly he was unknown. Another statement, they want to know about this new doctrine. And truly it was a new doctrine, wasn't it?
It was new, but they won't call it new, they won't call it a strange.
Yeah, right.
It's strange.
It's a strange doctrine.
Strange to the ear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And just like Brother Con said in verse 20, certain strange things to our ear. And it is strange. Now, when you compare, you sit down and you take all the religious teaching, and you haven't got to take all of them. You take some of the more popular religious teaching, and you set it down. And you look at the core doctrine of it, then you look at the core doctrine of Jesus Christ, you know what you're going to see? It's strange, and it's different. Being distinct. And this is what they could see. And so like Reed said, I perceive in all things you are too superstitious, religious, or zealous. And he's really opening this in a way of being courteous in a way, even though he knew that where he was going with this thought. I've got an audience that'll listen to me. Let me find some way to denote or appreciate what they're trying to do. Okay? And a lot of times we'll open a conversation like this to try to find some common ground so you don't run off your conversation piece, right? And so we find that he makes this statement in verse 23. He said, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. And you could say truly when you look at this and you look at the city of Athens and what was going on there, he was truly unknown to them, wasn't he? He sure was. They were looking at all the Greek and Roman gods, and I think, Jeremy, you talked about this some, and you talked about it some, Reed, about Greek mythology and the gods of Zeus and Neptune and all these different gods they were looking at, there in Athens. But see, they didn't want to leave anybody out, Brother Con. To the unknown God.
I just picked up another thought right there just then. To them, it seems like it's a strange doctrine, and it's unknown, but yet they're going to worship it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I was going with that thought, to the unknown God.
Yeah.
But anyway, Paul goes on to say, who therefore ye ignorantly worship. You are unskilled and unlearned to worship this unknown God. Really what he's saying is you don't really know nothing about this unknown God.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's really saying. Him, the unknown God, this is the God that I'm going to talk to you about. This is the God that I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to declare unto you this God, forget all these other gods. This is the God that you need to know, the unknown God.
Carrying on that thought there of the unknown God, first off there, you mentioned that Jesus and the resurrection, they wanted to hear something about that. Paul says in 1 Corinthians that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is a stumbling block to the Jews and it's foolishness to the Greeks. Here we're a very, very Greek audience. This is something that's foolish. They don't have this concept of a dying and rising God. not in the way that Paul is preaching Jesus Christ. They've got some things where gods are going to fall, and it's going to take them months to be able to recover. In some of their mythology, it's even said that it will take generations for them to be able to recover from the punishment that Zeus would put upon them. It's one of the ways that he threatened some of the lesser gods when they were wanting to cause trouble. It will take you generations to recover. It didn't take Jesus generations. And he wasn't just injured. Jesus was proven dead, and 3 days later, he's walking about. He's out of the tomb.
I'm sorry. They also view these gods as like playing chess with man.
Right. Yes, sir.
You know, you were in a great chess match between man and the gods and all this, and somebody's going to make this move, and somebody's going to make this move, and hopefully somewhere or another somebody will checkmate. But it's been a long, drawn-out process. Nobody's checkmated. So it's just a continuous cycle over and over and over of the same thing, really, of the same going on. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
So going back to the unknown God, and I heard something recently very interesting about this unknown God, and it has to do, in the mythology of things, gods fall out of favor with one another. Gods fall out of favor with mankind. Something will happen. A man who has worshipped one God all of his life, something will happen and a misfortune will fall upon him, and it happens in the realm of that God, and so he falls out of favor with that God, but he starts looking over here to another one, and then he starts worshiping this God because it in some way has blessed him in this realm. And so what happens is you have all these temples that are set up to gods, but sometimes this God over here falls out of favor, and mankind stops worshiping. They start devoting. They start They stop keeping up that temple, and it falls into disrepair. And then it eventually starts to crumble. And this may be a couple generations down the line, and they come across this temple, or they decide that, well, some God is back in favor, and so they start to rebuild this temple. But sometimes you have these temples that are in such disrepair that they have no idea what God that temple was dedicated to. And so when they re-raise that temple and bring that temple back up, we don't know what God it was for. So it is a temple to an unknown God. And they worship that unknown God in that sense. We're resurrecting that worship to them, but we don't really know who we're talking about. We don't really know who we're worshiping. There was a temple there, and so let's bring it back into repair, and let's start using it again, and we'll just dedicate worship to them, but it'll just be kind of we'll burn some incense in there, and we'll offer some heifers here and there, and that'll be it. So this unknown God is not necessarily that they're we're not wrong, like Brother Bobby said, in preaching that this is to a God we've never heard of, where we don't want to leave anybody out. But also it could be the fact that they've restored a temple over here and have no clue who it was to, but they're still going to be zealous enough to worship that unknown entity. Either way, Paul's playing upon that concept. You got this worship over here that fell into disrepute so long ago. Let me tell you about it. Let me bring you back around to this. And maybe even Paul is not even referring to all these things. Maybe he's just taking that as an illustration and saying, I've got an unknown God for you. You want to talk about something that's fallen into disrepair? You want to talk about a religion that's been dead for... Let me restore to you the true unknown God. Because all these people have descended generations ago from who? From Noah. All of them came from Noah. Who did Noah worship? The God that fell out of favor. Generations and generations and generations ago. Paul's going to bring them all the way back to that. Brother Jeremy, you had a comment?
Then we'll give Paul some credit. I'm sure the Holy Spirit's involved as well, but
Definitely.
his audience. He didn't start out talking about genealogy. It's
say that I became all things to all men in order that I might win some to Jesus Christ? And I'm going over to Romans chapter 1 here because I can't quite remember the wording that I want to get here. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and to the Greek, in verse 16. But previous to that, he says that I do not want you to be unawares. I've often intended to come to you, but I've been prevented in order that I may reap some harvest among you as well as among the rest of the Gentiles. I am under obligation both to the Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and the foolish. So I'm eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. It doesn't matter where Paul is. Paul sees I'm under obligation. And Paul uses any means within the gospel to be able to reach people. Now, in saying that, and giving that caveat within the gospel, I'm not promoting going into the bar and setting up a church in the bar, like some say. Well, the Apostle Paul said, I became all things to all men. No, we use our common sense here in this. But going off of what Brother Jeremy said there, he started exactly where they were with what they knew, with what they were familiar with, and is able to bring them forward to that. It's not a bad idea when studying with somebody to figure out what they know. To start with what they know. Start with that common ground. Start with the things that they know, the things you know. Find those things, and then we can start saying, well, start branching off and bringing in some other things until we can get to the gospel. But what that has done, it's established an authority. And if we do it properly, we establish the authority on the Word of God. When the Word of God is now the authority, now we can say, now wait a minute, what about this passage over here? We agreed upon this passage and what this passage said. So we can't contradict that when both of us agree with that. So what are we going to do about this over here? Ryan?
In a lot of ways, this all goes back to what made Paul the perfect apostle to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. He was a Jew and he wasn't a Judean from Tarsus.
Right.
He was a Roman, he was also a Jew. He learned about all these people who knew all this other stuff, and the worldly sense too, which made him the perfect person that Christ chose to do this work for him.
He really is. With all the learning and everything that he's had, he's able to reason and debate with anybody, whether it be Jews or whether it be the epitome of Gentile or Greek wisdom. He's able to reason with them. He's able to stand before the philosophers of the age and go toe to toe with them, for lack of a better term. He's able to stand there and he's able to hold their attention. Some of them looked at him as if he was some babbler. We saw that up the top, but further up, excuse me. Some thought he was a babbler, but others, he seems to be a preacher of four divinities. And we want to know what this new teaching is that you're preaching. That new teaching, the King James Version there will say the strange teaching. And what it means is that it is not previously present. It's strange to our ears. It's not previously been here. It's an unknown, it's a remarkable thing. And so this, what he's preaching is, they're saying is, what you're preaching is remarkable to us. We've never previously heard this before. It's a stranger to us, but yet it is remarkable. And that's fascinating.
I think about the religious world, though, Reed, too, in that. It is remarkable, because it is still a strange doctrine, even though within the religious world as we know it, we'll call it within Christendom, that's in parentheses, okay? And we understand what a Christian is. We do have people that believe in God, so a lot of the common ground Ryan's talking about, that you're talking about, and Jeremy's talking about, you can kind of skip a lot of that if you know what a man, where he stands and what he knows and doesn't know. I found that, God is not to be that big an issue. God creating the heavens and earth, not to be a big issue. God's son Jesus, not to be a big issue. Okay, so you can kind of jump through those hoops and kind of get right down to the nitty-gritty of it. What becomes remarkable to people is this fact here. You mean God has a plan? God has a kingdom here on this earth? Now, that's strange. That's different, isn't it? That's distinct. And so you can see how, if you take this a step back, how remarkable and distinct this had to be to them, because really, you know, in verse 24, what's Paul doing? He's kind of backing up to Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, isn't he? About God making the world. He's talking about the creator God. He's talking about the sovereign God. He's talking about the God that's a spirit. He's talking about a God that has divine ownership. All that has to be sure enough strange to them to back it all the way up that far to the beginning. And to bring them forward like he is going to do. You know, we're fortunate in some respects that some of those hoops we haven't had to jump through. A few times you have, because you do run into people who don't believe anything, you know. And sometimes I question that, because people that make out like they don't believe anything, if you never get them to stand still long enough, what's always fascinated me in talking to people at large and in general, and what people actually know when they'll open up to you. Some of this is ignorance by choice, okay? You run into a lot of that, okay? But you find that a lot of people, if you'll just get them to stand still and listen for a minute and get them to talking, get them comfortable, it's amazing to me what people know, you know, about religion, you know? But what makes it distinct is Jesus Christ, okay, they believe in the death, burial, and resurrection, but they don't believe in the meaning of it. That's where it gets clouded. That becomes strange that you repent and be baptized for remission of sin, and that water is a form or type of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection. Now that's strange. And what's even stranger, there's not but one church. Now that's super strange, because out in the religious world, where a lot of us came from, some of us did, some of us didn't, but where we came from, it was common to hear people make the statement until you, didn't matter if you was brand X, Y, Z, D, E, F, A, B, C, we're all okay because we're going in the same direction. We just take a different path to get there. Now, quite common, you know. But so it becomes distinct in that belief when you hear, well, there's not but one path. Jeremy, it's a two-way street. You're either going to heaven or you're going to the bad place. Right? So either you going or you coming. That is different. Okay? Anyway, go ahead, Peter.
Brother Con, you had a comment?
All I was gonna say a while ago, you read Romans 13 and 15 and 16, you know,
Yes, sir.
where Paul talking about the gospel and not being ashamed of it. But in the verse 17, ought to be tied right in there with it, because it explains why. It gives you the why. And that why reads like this. For therein, speaking in the preaching of the gospel, what that therein means. For
Right.
therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith.
Right.
As it is written, the just shall live by faith. And so that explains it all. If you're living outside of faith or worshiping outside of faith, you're missing the mark. Because the gospel has got it in there, and it's in there for you. It's in there for me. It's like saying Jesus died. He died for you. He died for me. And third, he died for the sins of the world. But I'm just saying that verse 17 is a strong reason why no one should ever be ashamed of the gospel.
In this idea of the distinct nature of what Paul was preaching, I know this is going back up to verse 18, but it is still also down here with the unknown God. I remember Brother Kenneth Randolph in Minor Prophets class, and Faulkner was taught. I don't remember which prophet we were talking about, but he was talking about how their message that they preached was in stark contrast to everything else that was being spoken at the time. And he said this about today: the church lost its distinct nature when it lost its distinct message. The church lost its distinct nature when it lost its distinct message. Even in, as Brother Bobby pointed out today, or just a moment ago, even today, talking with anyone else in religion, the Church of Christ is different.
Sure is.
We're different. We may share a lot of beliefs, but it's a different type of message. We're called to be something completely different than everyone else around us. And so we have a distinct nature, but it's because we have a very distinct message. And it's the same thing that we're looking at right here on Areopagus, is a distinct message that Paul is presenting. I'm presenting to you this unknown God. I'm presenting to you something, you're extremely zealous, you're devout, you're devoted to everything you do. Let me tell you about religion. Let me tell you about what God truly is. And it seems as Paul's message that he gives here is not really about a new God, but rather what it means to be a God. But rather what it means, what God really is. Whether it be the God that they are worshiping, or whether it be the God that Paul happened to be preaching out in the marketplace, let me explain to you this idea of theos, which is the Greek word for God, theology. Let me explain to you what this word is. Let me explain to you the concept of God. And it kind of seems what he's doing with this message here is that what is God? God, as we get down through this, God is a creator. God is a creator. What does it mean to be a God? It means that you create things. What does it mean to be a God? It means that you have no need of anything. To be a God, it means you have no need of anything. And then, yes, sir?
Exactly what it says.
Right. And then in verse 27 is to be a God, you need someone that you have people that seek after. You are not far from everything else around you. The people that would seek after you, it means when you are a God, it means you are not distant from your creation. To be a God, you must be a creator. To be a God, you must have no need of anything. And to be a God, you must not be distant. Now, when we come to the Greek gods, they don't check all of those boxes. They don't check all of those things. But the one true and living God does check all those things. And that's a complete sermon in and of itself. That little 3-point outline right there. We can go through a whole bunch of scriptures talking about how God checks all of those boxes. That's what it means to be a God. And so when Paul presents this message here, we may be able to go through this here and find a whole number of other things there. But when Paul goes through this message, he's not telling them about the God. He's telling them about what to look for in a God. When you talk about this unknown God, what do you look for about this unknown God? Who is this unknown God? This unknown God is a creator. This unknown God has no need of anything. And this unknown God is not very distant from each and every one of us. I only prepared my outline down to verse 28 down here, is kind of as far as I've gotten with my preparation and study for this. So to go through the rest of it, I'm sure I might be able to fill in a couple more things in that, but we may add to that outline later on here. But Brother Bobby, you want to continue on with
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point about who he was trying to identify as the unknown God. That is from identifying.
Right.
and you find today even a lot of times with people, you do have to go back and put that in as an identifier. You know, like we said, sometimes you do have to go back and talk about the God of Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Not that they don't believe there is a God, but you gotta have them understand that He is the creator God. He is a sovereign God. He needs nothing. He has a purpose. He has a plan. And so, you know, this is what He's doing here, is helping them identify, because what it's leading to is Jesus Christ.
Right.
And the plan of salvation. That's what it's leading to, okay? And so He had to do that in a way, and I thought it real interesting too, saying that He is the Lord of heaven, He's the Lord of earth. In other words, He is the maker of it all, both heaven and earth, and we know that. And also, He dwelleth not in temples made with hands. I'll stop, Ryan had something.
He's presenting them with a way to come to the conclusion themselves.
Yeah,
In
Exactly.
a lot of ways, that enables them to become better Christians because they're more grounded in it and they have a better, going back to Dribble Soda, a better root system
Right.
to last. And he's not just hitting them over the head with, God is God, Jesus Christ, this is what you gotta do, you have to do this. He's letting them come to that decision, that conclusion, and building up a faith from the ground up.
Right. Well, I mean, in verse 28, he takes what they know, even as one of your own poets have said, we are His offspring. You know, in Him we live and move and have our being. So he's encouraging them, like you said, to come to that realization on their own, and their devotion to God is correct. You know, their devotion to a God, to a deity, is correct. Now, the mode of their devotion and their worship, it may be a little skewed. You know, when they come over to Christianity, they're going to sacrifice to their God differently than what they sacrifice to these Greek gods, but they're still going to make sacrifices to God. They still understand the concept of God's angry at me because I did X. God desires for me to repent because I did this. I fell into temptation because of this. You know, all those things are still the same. So when they see this and they believe this, all that just translates right over. Now they're going to have to make changes in order to apply it to the new covenant, just like the Jews have to do. But just as the Old Testament stands as a schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, their theology has stood as a schoolmaster for them as well, to bring them over to Jesus Christ. Now, we need to go ahead and close out our lesson right there because of where we're at. But let's keep that same thought for our invitation here. You have verse 24, you said?
Yeah, hold just to 24.
Okay. That same thought of starting where we are, taking the foundation that we have, and translating that over to Jesus Christ. Go to number 605. 605, just as I am. This song is not saying that I can stay as I am and God's going to be okay with that. But God can take me as I am and make me into what He would have me to be. Whether I need to become a Christian by repenting of my sins, confessing Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and being buried in baptism to have my sins washed away, or whether I've done those things, I haven't been faithful, and I need to come back to the church. I need to make things right. Or I am faithful, but I have sinned, and I need to make things right between myself and my God. We can go from where we are, and God can take us from there and make us into what we need to be. So are we what we need to be this evening? We ask ourselves the question, are we what we need to be? Well, let's start there, and let's find out what we need to do. Are there any weights that we need to set to the side? Do we need to run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith? Are there any needs that we need to take care of this evening that our God can fully supply? If so, then let us do so as we stand and as we sing.